a musical vision that was originally rooted and influenced by black and death metal, a group shrouded in mystery and secrecy for several years until a vicious lawsuit forced their leader to reveal his true identity. They allegedly had their music banned in America due to concerns of Satanism and heresy. However, they quickly rose to fame and became one of the most unique artists of a generation, adored by millions and seen as a global phenomenon by some thanks to the mystique of Papa Emeritus and his nameless ghouls. This is Ritual, the story of Ghost. In 1996, an underground black metal compilation record was released in Sweden. An extremely small and independent label called Art the Occulta would be responsible for its release. Conquering the World would be the name of this incredibly rare cassette tape. The cassette featured songs from 14 different groups that almost nobody had heard of at the time: Norstrand, Funeral Mist, Imperial, and Sorin, to name but a few. Many of these then unknown Swedish black metal groups would go on to release several albums and even sign to labels such as Napalm Records. However, one group featured on this release was called Superior. They formed around 1995 and would only release 2 demo tapes, Metamorphosis in 1996 and Illustra ad Infernali in 1997. Thanks to the glory of the internet, we can at least hear one of these demo songs. This is The Bleeding White, taken from Metamorphosis. As you can hear, this is straight up black metal music, recorded and released at what you could call the height of the genre, the mid-90s. This is the same era we had De Mysteris Dom Sathanas from Mayhem, released in 1994, and the Norwegian and Scandinavian black metal scenes were quite literally running riot. But why is this an important band to even note in the story of Ghost? Well, because one of their members, a guitarist and songwriter for the group, was none other than Tobias Forge. When the Superior song Impamis Demonas featured on the Conquering the World compilation, Forge would have been around 15 or 16 years of age. During his time in Superior, he went by the stage name of Leviathan Forge, and even wore corpse paint and pretty much looked like every other black metal kid from that era of Scandinavian black metal history. Of course, black metal was very much linked to Satanism and satanic imagery, which does indeed feature throughout the visual history of Ghost. Tobias simply took this and transformed it into something that was far more accessible to a wider audience with Ghost. Shortly after his time with Superior, Forge would form a death metal group called Repugnant. Under this project, he would be known as Mary Gore and performed guitar and vocal duties. The first noted release would be Hecatomb in 1999, followed by Spawn of Pure Malevolence in the same year. I was not a vocalist until I was 18. We had just recorded the first demo with Repugnant. At the time of recording the demo in February of 1999, I was not the vocalist, but the bass player in the band was. I didn't like his vocals. I liked his vocals in his other band, but I didn't like it in Repugnant. He was sort of new school. I mean, to me, it was new school, like that sort of, and I wanted it to be like Chuck Schuldiner and Jeff Becerra. And I wanted it to sound like a 1985 death metal band. So I was like, I think I can sing like that, so I'm going to sing on the demo and we'll figure it out. Only one studio album would come from Repugnant and wouldn't even see a release until 2006, 2 years after the group had officially disbanded. Epitome of Darkness would be the title, and as far as death metal records go, this one is actually a bit of a beast. This is the same year that Tobias Forge would form 𝐳t, a group that now is well known for combining heavy metal and basically pop music, and is widely hated in many circles within the extreme music genres such as black metal or even just heavy metal in general. During the same era, Forge also turned his hand to indie rock with yet another musical project called Subvision. One studio album was officially released via a record label in 2006. That album was called So Far, So Noir, and it really does highlight how diverse Tobias Forge's songwriting skills are. Another Subvision record was also produced in 2008 by Tobias, Passiflora, but never saw an official release. So how and why did Tobias Forge decide to transition from a lover of extreme music and a certified Scandinavian black metal corpse paint loving kid to melding the genres of indie and 80s pop with heavy metal into the arena rock phenomenon we now know to be 𝐳t? 𝐳t would officially form in 2006, and there are two stories to this group. One is the story of the band itself, or rather Tobias Forge, and the other is the lore behind the characters that comprise the fictional story of 𝐳t as a mystical and almost medieval tale. Tobias Forge, eller om du säger på svenska Tobias Forge, was born in 1981 and raised in Linköping, Sweden. He would have been a teenager around the time the Norwegian black metal scene was developing, and of course, he would have been just as impressionable to these groups as any other kid from that era, especially as he was raised in a very religious environment, and as we all know, being raised as a Christian or a Catholic seems to be the #1 catalyst for starting a heavy metal band and turning to Satan. I didn't see my stepmother very often, maybe every other weekend. I understand now that I was the kid that my father had from a previous relationship, and I was an irritation in their new family. But she just happened to be religious as well, and she was very strict, and sometimes she sort of did that in the name of Christ, which did not paint me a very nice picture of Christian people. The idea of religion was drilled into him even more by a teacher in his school. And this also seems to be a very prominent reason as to why Forge became so enthralled in black and extreme metal music as a way of religious rebellion. She was very sour, very strict, very mean. Had it not been for the fact that it was illegal, she would have definitely hit us. She was a no bullshit sort of woman, but completely without humor. There was no charm whatsoever. What I remember is that she imposed a lot of religious classes on us, more than I think was according to the curriculum. She just represented this sanctimonious authority that I hated. And that, in combination with the alienation I felt every other weekend going to my stepmother's home, that was also sort of infiltrated by religion, definitely made me run headfirst into the arms of the devil. Tobias had an older brother, Sebastian, that would be responsible for introducing him to many of his early metal influences. When I was 3 or 4, my brother gave me a few records that I guess he bought for himself. A Susie and the Banshees record, a Kim Wilde record, a Rainbow record, and a Kiss record. That was Love Gun. And I was like, whoa. And he just said, you can have it. Technically, it was just staying in my room, you know? So it wasn't going far. He was very cool. Sebastian also gave me Shout at the Devil by Motley Crue. That was a record that actually scared me. I loved it, but I found it very, very terrifying, especially the intro. A little bit later, I also started to like the Rolling Stones a lot, and with their discography, you had Sympathy for the Devil and their Satanic Majesty's Request. When Forge was a kid though, he never really saw himself as a singer. He wanted to just be a guitarist. And when it came to 𝐳t, He even attempted to have Messiah Marcolin on vocal duties, who was the vocalist for Swedish doom metal band Candlemass from 1986 to 1991. Even when I was a kid, I always sort of identified myself with Keith Richards and Slash more than the singers of the bands. And even though I absolutely adored Mick Jagger in 1982, the way he looked and the way he performed, I wanted more to be the guitar player who was cool and smoked a cigarette without coughing. And so I was like, these are just Ghost demos with my vocals. They were going to be guide vocals. So you can see Forge took a very normal path in the way of trying to make something of himself as a musician. But the difference is a lot of the now iconic metal groups we know of kind of found success from day one, almost. This page we had was all very, very clandestine. I think it said Ghost, but from what I remember, it was a picture of a cathedral in the moonlight, and it just said Satanic Doom or something like that. Very, very simple. I really tried to narrow down the demographics, so it was people who were into bands that I sort of figured that we were, in one way or form, similar to. That was anything from Blue Oyster Cult to Pentagram to St. Vitus and that whole Doom scene. Candlemass, obviously, Angel Witch, Demon, you know, anybody that liked dark rock with some sort of melody in it. When Forge started to release music with Ghost, he was pushing 30 and had a pretty normal life and really no success in the music industry to speak of. He was still working in a call center for a Swedish mobile phone company. You can regard my life and say that not a whole lot happened before that. I had 2 kids and a social life, and getting married was a big step in life. But career-wise and fulfilling yourself and touring goals, it was definitely 29 years of what felt like non-activity. This, though, was all about to change. Not only would this day signify the start of a musical career he could never have possibly have dreamed of, it was also one of the most tragic days of his life. On the same day Forge released some of the very first Ghost songs, his brother Sebastian passed away. I didn't know at the time, but he had a heart disease that was, there's an elegant word for it that I don't remember, but apparently there's a condition where your heart muscles basically stiffen up. So unfortunately, he passed away literally on the day Ghost went public. That night, my whole life changed. Ever since then, it's hard not to feel that there might have been some sort of universal trade-off, like he was just giving me a big push in the back, and it hasn't stopped since. His brother's death, though, seemingly came as a shock to Tobias. March the 12th, 2010, would be a day that he would never forget. Sebastian was 13 years older than Tobias and would have been in his early 40s when he passed away. No doubt an incredibly difficult time in Forge's life. Sadly, even in the wake of death, the world continues, although for Forge, there was an incredibly bright light at the end of this dark tunnel. 2009, the first Ghost demo cassette would be released. It featured 3 songs, Prime Mover, Death Knell, and Ritual, all of which were uploaded to the Ghost MySpace page along with Elizabeth.
Fallen angels vexed was banished from their crusader. Heard his maternal slave now.
The Ghost MySpace bio said the following: "We have no names. We are your worst fucking nightmare. Ghost is a new Swedish band playing the evil-sounding heavy metal, once referred to as black metal." Tobias proceeded to add bands such as Tribulation, Dark Throne, Pentagram, and Merciful Fate, most likely in the hope of being noticed by someone in the music industry. The page was officially created on the 13th of April 2008, and by the time the songs had been uploaded to MySpace in 2010, within 48 hours, Ghost were being contacted by record labels. We went from absolutely nothing, a complete unknown, maybe 10 people in the world knew about it before that, and 48 hours later, the band was already being approached by all kinds of people. My career trajectory changed more in those 24 to 48 hours than I had ever experienced in my life. This would ultimately lead to Ghost signing with Rise Above Records for the debut studio album, Opus Eponymous, released in 2010.
Out of one substance with Satan.
And the concept behind Ghost was already in full swing. The mystery, the secrecy, and the idea of it being more than just another band. Ghost is the name of a devil-worshipping ministry that, in order to spread their unholy gospels, and furthermore, to trick mankind into believing that the end is ultimately a good thing, have decided to use the ever-so-popular rock music medium as a way to exploit their means. With sexually pulsating rock music and romantic lyrics that for the most part speaks about the Antichrist coming to life and other sacrilegious themes, the group's intention is simply to spread how the most effective way, through entertainment. The group's wish is that especially the innocent and easily manipulated children take a liking to their music. And they will. Ghost would play their first show on October the 23rd, 2010 at the Hammer of Doom Festival in Roisburg, Germany. The festival featured pretty unknown bands such as Solitude Eternus, Iron Man, Place of Skulls, and a few others. The following day, Ghost would head to the Camden Underworld in London to play another small festival called the Live Evil Festival, which also featured Angel Witch. Angel Witch are a pretty legendary British heavy metal band, known as one of the pioneers of the new wave of British heavy metal. It's easy to see that Tobias was really trying to follow in the footsteps of groups such as Merciful Fate, combining old school elements of black metal with heavy metal and even his 80s pop influences. Songs such as Ritual are a great example of this. And as we can see, the Papa characters were set in stone from day one. For the first 7 years of Ghost's commercial career, Tobias Forge would be mostly anonymous, only known as Papa Emeritus I. And all band members would also have their identities concealed. Papa Emeritus I would be the first leading figure in the Ghost story, and the costumes that he wore, along with the nameless ghouls by his side, were actually made by a local seamstress in Linköping that mostly created clothing for local religious figures of the same natures, such as bishops. Along with the artwork of the album, lyrics, song titles, and the overall secrecy behind the group, this was an extremely unique vision considering the time. In the same year as Opus Eponymous, Rise Above Records would release albums by the likes of Electric Wizard, and the overall state of the alternative metal scene in 2010 was, well, pretty boring. There really wasn't anything in the way of a clear, defining genre for this era. Nu metal was long dead, and heavy metal in general was kind of asleep. I've always wanted Ghost to sound like the one band from the 70s that you haven't heard. If there's a reason Ghost sounds like it does, it's because I've been such a fan of 60s, 70s, and 80s music. There's a lot of things in there, except for maybe King Crimson. Some stuff over the records wouldn't be written in the 70s because it's from someone who likes Necrophagia and Morbid Angel and stuff like that. You don't have riffs like that. They weren't made up in 1977. I'd say one of the most interesting albums and artists from this era would be Rammstein, having released their 6th studio album, Liebe ist für alle da, or Life Ad for short, in the previous year. So not only did Ghost have an incredibly unique image and sound, they came along at a time when metal overall kind of needed a kick in the ass. And no, I'm not saying Ghost saved metal, nor am I making any such claim. simply that their presence and introduction to the world of metal was pretty good timing. You only have to look at something like Download Festival in 2010 to see just exactly how stale metal had become. AC/DC, Rage Against the Machine, and Aerosmith as headliners from Metal Festival didn't exactly scream fresh, new alternative music. Ghost's debut record, Opus Eponymous, would reach number 30 in the Swedish album charts and even land a top 100 spot in the German album charts as well. Not bad for a band nobody had heard of just a few months prior. The real spirits of Ghost, though, had yet to be summoned. Infestissimum, the second studio album by Ghost, would be released on April the 10th, 2013, and questions started to arise over the nature of the band's alleged satanic themes. Satanism has long been connected to heavy metal, and especially Scandinavian metal. We only have to go back to the mid-90s to be reminded of a wave of church burnings that took place in Norway amongst the rise of the black metal movement, something that Tobias Forge was very aware of, having grown up as a teenager in Sweden during this era. And of course, Ghost are not a black metal band. However, the link to Satanism was being put in place, and according to a nameless ghoul at the time, most likely Tobias Forge, the music of Ghost was being banned in record stores and radio stations. Along with this, manufacturers refused to even print the CD album due to the presence of images of naked women. Define mainstream. We are banned from most of the chain stores throughout the US, and most American TV stations won't have us on their late night shows. Most commercial radio stations won't play us. So yes, mainstream America is absolutely welcoming us with open legs. We couldn't help but to laugh at the fact that it was the nudity that made the stir, when obviously they should have raised their hands over the inverted crosses. Pathetic and just downright ridiculous. If we take a look at Papa Emeritus I, the first official leader of Ghost according to Ghost lore, we can see he absolutely looks like a satanic priest or bishop, dressed in what you could describe as a Roman Catholic clergy style set of robes, complete with a traditional Catholic style mitre, a headdress commonly used for bishops, but also we see the inclusion of the inverted cross. Not only do we have this type of imagery combined with corpse paint traditionally associated with satanic black metal, if you look closely at the hand of Papa Emeritus I, he is also displaying the hand sign of Baphomet. Baphomet, of course, is now a well-known occultist figure and features on the front cover of albums such as Venom's Welcome to Hell, amongst many other records that were deemed to be satanic in nature. I mean, you only have to look at this picture to see an eerie resemblance to, say, a satanic cult. But does this actually make Ghost a satanic band? Well, not really. This comes more so from Tobias Forge, like many others, simply trying to oppose the traditional concept of organized religion. And as with many curiously rebellious children and teenagers, simply look to other figures for inspiration and guidance. As a young teen, Satan and the idea of some sort of world that you could be in touch with that could empower you was very much the symbol of freedom. I guess more so than I had already been introduced to by Motley Crue and Gene Simmons. I think for 99.9% of every so-called Satanist in the last 50 years, you would find that the vast majority of them had been introduced to the devil via music. And it usually happens at a certain age as well. And I would say that comes from bedazzlement. And it was also the early 90s, so that was the rise of the death metal and black metal movement in Europe, and in the world, I guess. Especially in Sweden and Norway, it was a big thing. And it was right up my alley. And not to mention that during this era of Ghost, they even recorded an ABBA cover. Not very satanic. Nevertheless, Infestissimum would be a commercial smash hit, number 1 in the Swedish charts, number 28 on the US Billboard 200, and even landed a number 1 on the US top hard rock albums. Tobias Forge and his vision for Ghost was well and truly on its way to becoming a global phenomenon. Ghost have taken an incredible journey since the very humble days of uploading demos to MySpace to an audience of essentially nobody. Opus Eponymous in 2010, Infestissimum in 2013, Meliora in 2015, Prequel in 2018, Impera in 2022, and most recently Skeleta from 2025 have all displayed truly unique concepts and vision from Tobias Forge. So far, 4 of their 6 studio albums have reached #1 in the Swedish charts and seen immense success in charts around the world. And no doubt the latest record, Skeleta, will be another epic release. And now with iconic songs such as Squarehammer, Rats, Year Zero, Mary on a Cross, and instrumentals such as Miasma, one of my personal favorites because, come on, who doesn't like a bit of good 80s saxophone? It's hard to deny the sheer talent and driving force behind this project, fueled by the imagination and creativity of Tobias Forge. One thing that makes Ghost an incredibly unique group is the lore. You have characters, mystery, secrecy, drama, and of course the visual aspects of how this lore is presented to the audience. The main focus of this lore revolves around the lead character, or characters, as they change. Papa Emeritus 1, Papa Emeritus 2, Papa Emeritus 3, Cardinal Copia, Papa Emeritus 4, and the most recent incarnation, Papa 5 Perpetua, all of which are played by Tobias Forge. There are other characters in the story, such as Papa Neil and Sister Imperator. This fictional tale that fans can get lost in is essentially like another world that you can be part of through the music and the live shows. It isn't just another band playing some instruments, it's an experience. And I will add, from seeing Ghost live 3 times myself, it's definitely an experience. What I find truly incredible about the history of Ghost is how diverse the influence is. Tobias Forge started out in a black metal band as a teenager, tried his hand at indie rock and even death metal, and somehow managed to transform all of that into what we see today. He's gone far beyond what most musicians could ever achieve, and that is to build a real life vision in which he can project onto the world and sell millions of records doing so. All hail Papa 5 Perpetua.